Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Box Office Talk. This is the show where I break down what happened at the box office, see if my predictions for the top 5 are correct, then make predictions for next week's top 5. So let's get right on into it. Last week I predicted that number 1 would be How to Train Your Dragon, number 2 would be 28 Years Later, number 3 would be Elio, number 4 would be Lilo and Stitch, and number 5 would be Materialists. And goddamn, I was so close. One film away. I got 4 out of 5 of my predictions right. If you got them right, congratulations. Here are your shoutouts right now. I should have guessed. Go with my hunch that, Materialists would not have, not that it dropped off drastically, and we'll talk about that when we get to it, but just it would not be able to compete with what actually snuck back into the slot above it. Let's go into what happened overall, though. Number 1 was, once again, How to Train Your Dragon, and I was wondering, what's this hold gonna look like, because recently we just saw Lilo and Stitch make and is still making a ass load of money, some great holds there. I was wondering how this one would do, and I'm going to continue to wonder how it's going to fare throughout the rest of the summer pretty much, because it had like a little bit of an over 50% drop from its opening to now, its second weekend, which isn't bad, especially since right now it made $37 million this weekend, which now adds to a domestic total of $160 million. Worldwide, that adds to a total of $358 million. So whatever we talk about, just remember that it's already doubled its initial production budget of $150 million. They've made $58 million over that. They need about $92 million to triple it. So they're already kind of in the clear. But as far as, competing with the other Chris Sanders, Dean DeBlois live-action remake film Lilo and Stitch, I was wondering, is How to Train Your Dragon going to be able to catch on like that one? And I guess not. And I'm not quite sure what the difference is between the two. I mean, especially if you were to ask me, I think the How to Train Your Dragon remake is at least a little bit more watchable. It is a better remake overall than Lilo and Stitch. I'm not sure why Lilo and Stitch caught on. Is it just like Stitch is cuter, and like even though Toothless is cute, like the transition from animation to live action might scare some people, whereas the creatures in Lilo and Stitch just look cuter? Maybe I'm not sure why the difference. Either way, though, this movie is still, rocking and rolling. It has outgrossed the entire domestic run of The Hidden World by a couple 100,000. It is 17 million away from outgrossing Part 2. And then with the worldwide numbers, it is 137 million behind the original film. So domestically, it's already creeping, by some of the other films. And then worldwide, it still has a way to go. But I think at the very least, it will probably outgross the first movie, just looking at where it's at right now. But yeah, I am curious to see, because it just seems like for a while we're going to get some heavy hitters. Next weekend is Mothrigan 2 and F1, but then after that we got Jurassic World right around the corner, Superman, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Fantastic Four, more importantly, Eddington. All right, that one's probably Eddington will probably not be that much of a box office threat, but I am curious to see how this one will continue to hold against that. So that'll be very interesting to see. Maybe Lilo and Stitch just kind of got in early enough, kind of at the right little smack of time, and How to Train Your Dragon's kind of in a transition kind of period, you know what I mean? I'm not sure. You can never guess these things sometimes. Then again, we did have Lilo and Stitch in another movie as far as family films kind of pulling some competition. We'll talk about that a little later, though. Number 2 is 28 Years Later, a franchise best right here with its opening weekend, making 30 million domestically. This is 20 million over the opening weekend for 28 days and 21 million the weekend for 28 weeks later. So yeah, highest opening weekend for the franchise domestically. And then also it's the highest wide release opening for Danny Boyle. His previous one was Yesterday, and this one made 13 million over that one. And even because some of his movies have opened in limited release and have gone on to, have wider releases, his highest grossing film, Slumdog Millionaire, I even went through those weekends to see okay, let's see how high they rose up. And this movie's opening weekend right here is still higher than, the highest that Slumdog made in a weekend. So that's pretty good. As far as Danny Boyle's domestic filmography, it has outgrossed Trainspotting 2 and Shallow Grave by 28 million, Sunshine by 27, A Life Less Ordinary by 26, Millions by 24, First Trainspotting by 14, Steve Jobs 13, and it's 12 million over 127 hours. So right now it is 9 million away from the domestic run of The Beach. So pretty great start for that. And then jumping back to the 28 franchise. It has already outgrossed 28 weeks later by 2 million, and it needs 15 million to get past Day. So, making some waves already domestically, and then you jump to worldwide, sitting at 60 million, which may or may not be on target with its initial production budget. I've seen some say it's 60, some say it's 75, so right around that range. But I think some people have been responding positively to this opening, though. So, maybe they're in the clear. I'm hoping that as far as like horror competition, this one will be able to maintain, an audience. I know the cinema score was B, which is not awful. Obviously, we've seen it get worse, right? But I do wonder, with this other competition that's coming up, I do wonder if 28 years will be able to, maintain. I hope so, just because I really loved it, and I know there are a lot of people that are talking about it, like it's this great thing, and I'm hoping that word of mouth spreads more than some people that are kind of like mixed on it. Not that their opinion is invalid, but I just would like to see this do well, and I hope people are just more so curious and interested by the reception, even if it does veer into some, people that are a little mixed on it or don't know how to feel. I hope that just gets people more intrigued. For the franchise, it is 4 million away from outgrossing 28 weeks later worldwide, so bit of a way to go, but I think it's going to outgross both films very soon in both domestic and worldwide lists. And then for Danny Boyle worldwide, it is, here we go again, 58 million over Shallow Grave, 48 million over Millions, 46 over A Lifeless Ordinary, 38 over Trance, 28 over Sunshine, 25 over Steve Jobs, 21 over The Beach, 18 over Trainspotting 2, and it squeaked by 127 hours by a couple 100,000. It is 11 million behind the original Trainspotting. That's just really cool to see just how this one really is like one of Danny Boyle's, best openings, you know what I mean? Just blasting through all these other movies as runs, and just look at the list of movies here, you know what I mean? Like, you almost kind of forget sometimes, like, yeah, Danny Boyle's behind some, well talked about, some pretty well reviewed, and in some cases some controversial movies, and that's, I just think that's cool to list out an interesting list of films for once. That's really cool. So yeah, I am looking forward to seeing how this one will continue to hold. I'm pretty sure they've already shot the sequel to this, and that's kind of guaranteed to be coming out, but I'm hoping that, whatever they make here, and potentially with the next film as well, is enough to, fund the third part that they've talked about, because this is like part one of like a new trilogy for 28 years. So I would like to see that, especially after seeing this one and loving it so much. Number 3 was Elio. Now, here's the thing. With Pixar's original films as of late, it hasn't always been the best, right? But Elemental opened not so great, and people were already like, wow, one of the worst ever for a new Pixar. Remember when these were big events, even their original films? But, Elemental did, even though it wasn't, like, amazing, it did go on to squeak by the doubling point of its initial production budget overall. It had a solid hold over that summer. I'm not saying that Elio is guaranteed to have that, but I don't want to immediately jump on in this case, because we have seen it happen before where, Elemental is really the only example as far as Pixar, where, that one went on to have a pretty solid summer overall, and they kind of are coming out around the same time, so Elio could have that. But, with Lilo and Stitch nearby, and we'll talk about that, How to Train Your Dragon also ruling the box office right now, I'm sure it doesn't look too great, but, we'll see. And yeah, these other blockbusters that are coming out, but we will see. I don't want to rule it out just yet. But that being said, yes, this is the worst wide release for a Pixar film ever. Because when you go back, Toy Story 2 and A Bug's Life open in limited release first, but then for their second weekends, they open wider, and those numbers are higher than what Elio made this weekend, which is 21 million domestically. And then worldwide, it's only bumped up to 35. I, for a brief bit, saw that this budget was maybe around 300 million. There was talks of retooling the narrative and going back to redo certain parts of the film. Some people are saying actually the budget is around 150 million, so who knows? I'm sure they need a lot, though. In general, for most Disney films, they need a lot to break even. This is definitely not a great sign if you're just looking for like immediate, like very clear box office success. This is definitely going to play a long game, if it even does. So as far as it being the worst, previously it was the original Toy Story and Elemental with 29 million. That was the one to beat, and this one opening to 21, 8 million below that. Yeah, worst wide release they have ever done. and I'm sure it'll continue to discourage them from trying to make original films or, marketing or promoting them the way they have been, or supporting them the way they have been, which is a shame. I know they were talking about a new one recently, which looks very Flow-ish inspired. That might be the last one. That might be the last original thing they ever make. Then they're going to focus on sequels and they'll do spin-offs. That's all that they're going to be. Who fucking knows? Oh man. Anyways, as far as domestic runs, it did outgross Soul by 21 million because Soul went to Disney Plus domestically, and it's 20 million over Luca and Turning Red. Obviously, these three films had slight re-releases, but those never caught on because it was kind of like too little, too late. It's already at home. It needs 40 million to outgross the entire run of Onward. Who knows if it's going to have the momentum to get there? I'm not going to rule it out, but still, yeah, it's not great. And then with the worldwide list, it outgrossed Turning Red by 23 million and needs 16 million until it gets to Luca. Obviously, those three films that I mentioned had a better time in the COVID area of release as opposed to the States. The States just got it on Disney Plus, and it seems like everywhere else there was some kind of theatrical release. Anyways, Elio's in a rough spot. Maybe this can pull an Elemental, but I don't know. We'll see, man. I'm not sure. I know this got an A cinema score, why wouldn't it? But cinema score doesn't guarantee people are going to keep talking about it, saying you got to go see it, especially since, How to Train Your Dragon is out. So who knows? And also number 4, which is Lilo and Stitch, making 9.7, adding to a domestic total of 386 million. It is 118 million away now from the domestic run of the Beauty and the Beast remake. Worldwide, it is sitting at 910 million. That places it 41 million away from the Jungle Book and 90 million away from breaking $1 billion, which I don't want because this movie fucking sucks ass. Once again, going back to what I was saying, and I'm not in love with the How to Train Your Dragon remake. I just think as far as like everything that I expect from these live action remakes these days, this one was definitely way better at doing that, right? I would still not want that to, be the shining light for like, yeah, we just got to keep remaking shit. We just got to do it like How to Train It, because I still think there's a wave of pointlessness surrounding it. But that being said, How to Train Your Dragon was the better one. And it's kind of, it would be a shame if How to Train Your Dragon can't at least catch up to Lilo and Stitch, which, like I said, I find to be a very, very worse film and remake. You can watch my video if you want to learn more about that. Anyways, number 5 is Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. No Materialists. Get out of the way for Ethan Hunt. It made 6.5 million, adding to a domestic total of 178 million. Domestically, it just passed Dead Reckoning by 6 million. Way to fucking go. It's 2 million behind the original film as well, so it's going to clear through that very soon. Very exciting that at the very least domestically they have crossed over this movie that was kind of seen as like a failure back in 2023, and I'm sure in some ways, sure, yeah, it was, thanks a lot, Barbenheimer. But it is cool that, even though we've talked about how it's probably not going to, break even while it's in theaters, the budget probably ballooned too high, but at the very least that more people seem to be seeing this compared to Dead Reckoning's overall run, and those two are pretty close together as far as releases, so not too much adjusting for inflation, I hope, to make a difference. At the very least, that's just a solid way to end it, and especially, so close to outgrossing another film in the list domestically. Worldwide, it is sitting at 540 million, so that's 9 million away from MI2. Still a ways to go there, but, it's still making money. Way to go, Ethan. Number 6 is The Materialist, making 5.8 million. So last weekend I was kind of talking about how, I wonder if certain reactions to the film are going to cause, a bigger drop-off. I'm not sure what the word of mouth is going to spread out to be. So, and it didn't drop off too terribly, though. So a little over 50%. I mean, that's what How to Train Your Dragon did. So not too terrible, I would say. It's still on track to do pretty well. With this 5.8 now adds to a domestic total of 23 million. For A24, it squeaked by The Disaster Artist by 2 million, and it's 1 million behind We Live in Time, a recent one of theirs. It is number 16 in their overall domestic runs. Worldwide, it is sitting at 31 million, so not only is it 9 million away from doubling their initial production budget of 20 million, but for A24 worldwide, it is squeaked by Spring Breakers by a couple 100,000, and it's only 1 million away from Warfare, another recent A24. Currently, it is at number 21. So it's about to get into the top 20 for A24 worldwide runs, which is pretty stellar. For Celine Song, we talked about last week, and it already outgrows Past Lives domestically. Worldwide, it still needs 11 million to get there. I'm hoping that it has, the momentum to get that plus 9 million to double its budget, but an extra 2 million wouldn't hurt as well, just to, ensure that Celine Song can keep making movies and can show that like a lower budgeted film can do well, you just gotta, have a good hook, get people interested, have, actors that people are interested in. Number 7 is Ballerina. Yeah, this one still not holding over great. It did, get past some kind of milestone though. With this 4.5 million domestically, it adds to a total of 51 million. For the John Wick films, it has outgrossed the original by 8 million, so there's that. It needs 41 million to clear Chapter 2 though, probably not going to happen. For Len Wiseman domestically, it outgrossed Underworld finally by a couple 100,000, needs 7 million until his Total Recall film. Maybe it has some momentum to get there. Worldwide, it did cross over 100 million, so that is, that's a go point. That's not too bad, especially on a budget of 80 to 90 million. That's at least like, better than terrible. For the John Wick franchise though, worldwide, it is still behind Chapter 2 by 71 million. For Len Wiseman, it outgrossed Underworld by 5 million. It needs 13 million until Underworld Evolution though. Once again, it probably has the momentum to get to that at least. But yeah, I think a lot of people were saying like, action's great. I would like to see this character in something else. And I was of the same opinion, even if I thought the rest of the movie was kind of middling, just, kind of been there, done that in some cases. I've seen it better, but not an awful film. I would like to see Eve again. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if these results really are warranting that for at least from the studio's point of view. Or at the very least, this character could show up in something else, but, maybe not a direct sequel to this. Not that that entirely matters, because it's not like, unless I missed a post-credit scene or something, that movie doesn't necessarily end in a way where it's like, man, we gotta make another one. It's kind of like, there could be room for it, but, it kind of ends the same way that most of the John Wick movies end. Number 8 is Karate Kid Legends. Okay. They made 2.4 million, adding to a domestic total of 49 million, so 41 million away from the original film at this point. Worldwide, it is sitting at 98 million, so 2 million shy from the 100 million goalpost that Ballerina has. But they have at this point doubled their 45 million initial production budget, so not for nothing, they did cross over that milestone, even if it's kind of like small victory at this point. It did outgross the original film's worldwide run by 8 million and needs 17 million until part 2. I definitely think that they wanted something bigger though, like even just squeaking by their doubling point. I feel like after the recent boom that was Cobra Kai, that these movie executives were like, well, we can bring Karate Kid proper back to the theaters, and I feel like maybe they were expecting a bit more at that point, maybe make a better movie. It was pretty bad. But maybe also the thing is, like, at that point, after Cobra Kai had been going on so long, just bringing back Ralph Macchio isn't enough. Because here's the thing, as somebody who has also watched Cobra Kai, and I love Ralph Macchio in it, but, Johnny Lawrence is the lead, and that's the character I feel like people really grew to love from that, even equal to or maybe a little bit more than Danny LaRusso, right? So it does feel like maybe a bit of a miscalculation to be like, what if we just bring back Daniel LaRusso and Han from the Jaden Smith one? It's kind of like, as far as pandering goes, seems like a missed opportunity. Number 9 is Final Destination Bloodlines, making 1.8 million, adding to a domestic total of 134 million. For horror film lists, it is still behind FNAF and The Conjuring by 3 million. And then worldwide, now that it's at 280 million, it did outgross Silence of the Lambs by 5 million and Split by 2 million. It is now 15 million away from Resident Evil Afterlife, but it has officially entered the top 20s for horror films worldwide runs of all time, which is pretty spectacular. It's probably going to leave next weekend, so I really don't have much more to add. We've already talked about how this is pretty stupendous and amazing, so yeah, that's just really cool. And I'm glad it's ending, the list here. Oh wait, sorry, we have an actual number 10. Kuber, never heard of it. Kind of a bummer to end on a movie no one's heard of. Not nobody, just, most people, and I don't have anything to add here. It only made 1.7 million. This is on a budget of 120 crore. Yeah. Now it's time for the fun part, the predictions for next week's top 5. Number 1, call me crazy, because I know Mithrigan really broke out back in 2023, but I wonder if it will not be the same. Even though that first movie has a popularity surrounding it, I do wonder if it's going to be that thing where they make a sequel, but the audience is, it's there, but not the same amount. So number one, I do think could be F1, just based off of, they're touting the fact that it's from the director of Top Gun Maverick. They have a lot of similar shots from driving in the car. People are excited about that. And I think, having IMAX and Dolby, these higher grade kind of theaters to go see it in, I think that's going to add up, And then number two, I think will be Mathregan 2.0. I could be wrong on this though, and we'll see how that plays out. Number three, I think will be How to Train Your Dragon. Number four, 28 Years Later. And number five, Elio. But what are your predictions for next week's top five? Leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.